Happy Friday, or sorry, happy Friday to everybody. Thanks for coming out today, and welcome to February's Friday Live. I'm Charles Delfs, founder of FM BetterForms, as most of you guys know, and we got a couple different things to present today, and it's not so much of our team; it's more kind of lessons learned is the main topic of today. But I also want to do a technique video, and we were hoping to have one of our team present a URL shortener, but unfortunately he's in school right now. So I'll be presenting what he's worked on for him. All right, a couple things. We'll start off with a little bits of news, and then we'll kind of jump into things. Today's meetup, I want it to be really kind of conversational, so please jump in, interrupt, talk, ask questions, and things like that. I don't personally get a chance to look at the chat too often, so if there's something you're typing into the chat, maybe somebody else sees it and they can verbalize it. Let's start off with what's new in BetterForms land. Right, we'll just talk about what's coming up on our roadmap and what we've accomplished in the past little while. A few things. We're making some small tweaks and changes to the way OAuth works. That's if you're using third-party authentication. We've discovered some small issues. So we're working on, Eduardo's the chief engineer on that, and he's working on making those changes to our base code and refining the workflow streams, looking for best practices. We've used OAuth, which is, if you're not familiar, it's using things like Google, Auth0, Okta, Facebook, all those social logins, all those types of unified logins or identity providers with BetterForms. So we're working on ways of streamlining that, finding out best practices before we sort of throw it out into the wild. If that's something that you're interested in using, you're welcome to use it now. Contact our team. We'll work one-on-one with you in implementing it, because we have most of the documentation done, but we don't have it. We don't have a ton of examples at the moment. A few other things we're working on is we discovered a very small bug in our actions processor, and it's a real edge case scenario, and it's only come up now that we're sort of discovering new ways of using the underlying scripting engine in BetterForms. So we're working on changing that as well. It doesn't really affect anybody for the most part. It does affect some of the stuff that we personally build, because we're kind of pushing the limits a little bit. And a few other things in the backlog. Actually, this is not on the backlog anymore. This is going to be started this quarter, is our graphical user interface page builder. So this is a drag and drop editor. And I'll give you a really quick sneak peek of that, because it's pretty exciting. And let me see. Am I sharing my screen okay before I go too far? We're good? Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
All right, awesome. This is how we edit pages now. Right, so we edit JSON. You can see here is a button. There's some HTML if we wanted to use that, and there's some more. Here's another code editor, and so on. So that's how we edit things now. And we actually started this in an iterative process. I'll just show you here really quick. We saw this. This was last month. I think I previewed this maybe. This is a drag and drop style editor where you can drag blocks, but it's not exactly what you see is what you get. So it's a huge step in the right direction. And basically the idea here is if you have an input field, you can click on that. You can make the changes. Let me move my zoom out of the way here. I can make the changes to that. And I could say something like width 1/2, and that would change that input size box and so on. So that was our first iteration. And this is actually editing actual BetterForms schema under the hood. But last week we came up with a newer version, and it's pretty exciting. Let me just see here. Where is it? And this is our new version. So this is purely a mock-up. Well, it's actually functional, but it's a mock-up in the sense of it's not actually saving pages and things like that. We're developing the technology underneath the hood first, and what strategy we want to use, what's going to carry us over the next 5 or 10 years, and so on. So basically, you see here, I have a page inside here, and I have an editor on the outside. Now this is, again, just a test bed here. But now what I'd be able to do is to be able to drag components onto the page, and I can actually rearrange the page. So these are actual BetterForms fields, and I have a sidebar. Maybe I want that sidebar on the right-hand side, and I can just do that. All right. So if I change my mind, easy enough, we can go back and forth. Maybe we want to change this advanced search button and we want to put it up at the top. We can do things like that. We can move all this stuff around. We can edit all the components on the page graphically. We'll still have the ability to dig as deep as we want. One of the best things I think about BetterForms is that we can dynamically control virtually every attribute on the page. So that means if you want a label that says first name, and then I want to change it for certain people to say nickname or something like that, we can add a calculation to that label. We'll still be able to have all of that access underneath the hood. We'll still be able to customize and do everything. But at the high level, for organizing things and for seeing things, we're going to have this UI here. What's going to be really, really exciting about it is this page is your actual page running in your app. That means this button will be live while you're editing it. So you're going to be editing a live application, right? So I think this is going to be, I don't want to promise too many features, but these are the things that are totally doable for us from what we can see. We're going to be developing this over the next 3 months and are engineering it and then architecting it. Then over the next, from month 3 to month 6, the second quarter of this year, we're going to be doing the build out phase. It's mostly just building on this one page, but there's a lot of underlying technology and some small base code tweaks that we have to make to the to our base code to add some abilities that we need, which is good because those base code tweaks are, of course, extended to every developer that uses BetterForms as well. And then we're hopefully around July, August, we're going to have our first alpha release. If you have any questions about that, by all means, jump right in. But that's something that's in the roadmaps. A few other things we got coming up. Improved error support. This is something that's brand new. I think we demonstrated it last month, so I won't go over it this month. We're still working on what methods that we're going to handle all these different types of errors. So this means the main purpose of error support or error handling is so that you can, as you're setting something up and something's not working right, you don't have to contact us, right? You can be able to diagnose it right away and it's going to fail loudly. So you're going to see what's going on. Some errors will fail very quietly, like something that you might have done a coding error that's in a production environment. We'll have that fail quietly, but a coding error in a development environment or a missing script or something like that in FileMaker, those will fail a lot louder. So that's kind of the idea. So that's pretty exciting there. Eduardo and Egap of our team are working on that project. You'll also be able to customize your error pages. So if you want like a 404 not found, you'll be able to use our default one. And if you have a slug added into your navigation structure, then it'll use your custom page as well. So that's pretty neat. We're continuing to do performance optimizations. Some of the new things that we're looking at is edge side caching. So that means basically we're looking at caching the BetterForms base code at around 200 or so locations using CloudFront, similar to Cloudflare type technology. And we're not going to have edge side processing because from our perspective, BetterForms is a stateful. The server is running stateful because we have a continuous connection to our server via sockets. So that doesn't really lend itself as well to fully edge computing, but that's okay because we still have to, regardless, have to communicate to your FileMaker server. So we're not really having a huge savings benefit there. All right, and I think that's it for our roadmap. Does anybody have any questions about that stuff? All right, awesome. I was kind of contemplating, and I noticed there's a lot of people here that are kind of new to our group. So the main topic I wanted to talk about today is sort of lessons learned. I have the amazing opportunity to work with probably about 90% of the people in our group here, sort of one-on-one. We pair code together and work on things. And as I do that, I often make notes. Oh, that's really good. I really like when somebody's doing that. I'm really impressed with that. Or, oh, that's really bad the way they're doing something. And I'll make a note of that as well. And I've compiled these notes. And I was wondering, I think I might want to, yeah, you know what? We'll go through this first. Excuse me. We'll go through our feature first. Or sorry, our our technical side of stuff first, and then we'll jump into the lessons learned, the main topic. Is anybody currently using the BetterForms API, the REST API that's built into BetterForms?
Not me.
We are.
You are? What are you using it for?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, not into BetterForms. My fault. Not into BetterForms. We are not.
All right. So basically, I'll tell you a little bit about it. BetterForms has a built-in REST API. So basically, it's a built-in API or endpoint that you can use to access your FileMaker database, your business file, from any third-party application. So if you have Stripe, for example, and Stripe, you can register webhooks, callbacks. You would put the BetterForms API link, which is basically your FileMaker, your BetterForms domain with a /API on the end. And we can have a separate talk on this if you'd like. And you register that in in Stripe or Slack even. And when some kind of an event happens in that third-party system, it sends a message back with some type of a payload back into your application. Traditionally, you used to have to use things like REST FM was a product. And there's a few other ways, or I used to just code them by hand using either PHP or whatever technology at the time. And that's how we had to communicate back into FileMaker. And now BetterForms already has a built-in REST API, which is really, really handy for these kinds of things because it uses the same payload system as all your hooks do. So that means you have tracking. You don't have to build any audit logs or anything like that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how Floristware and how Mark, who's actually in the call here, or was actually, I think he messaged me, said he had to jump off, how he's using this REST API. So basically, he's using it for a few different things. Let me tell you about his app, first of all. And just a second here. I'm just going to pull it up because I thought I had it open, but I must have closed the tab.
Hey, Charles.
Yes.
Can I just say something quickly while you're doing
Absolutely.
that? So, we do a point of sale thing for Floors, and the part Charles built for us is this really fantastic mobile delivery app. And obviously Monday is our D day, or was our D. And I just need to mention that there were hundreds of shops, each handling dozens of drivers, doing dozens of deliveries. And with BetterForms, the whole thing just worked perfectly. We were talking tens and tens of thousands of records being generated that day, and it just worked perfect, Charles. And I can't thank you enough.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. It's kind of neat because you build an app, and this goes for everybody. We build this stuff, and we spend a whole bunch of time in it, and we jump to another project. And then you have to go back into that same database, maybe a half a year later or months later, and you see all these records there and you go, holy cow, I guess it's actually getting used. I was in an app that I built about 10 years ago, and then I see about 100,000 contacts in the app. And it was so rewarding to see all of that data without having too much support calls almost in that whole time. And I think that's kind of a reward that we don't often see. I have to generate a token here. So just give me a second here. Yeah, just a sec. It figures I don't have I wanted to show you where this is being actually used. Sorry, I just have my screen paused because I don't want to see some certain things here. And I wanted to show you how it's being used first of all, but I don't have a legitimate token. So give me a quick sec. And and what I'll do is I'll tell you basically what Mark's app does. Mark has a point of sale florist where I guess technically it's a CRM plus a whole application that pretty much runs the flower shop. And in that process, they have deliveries. And when a user is making a delivery, they needed an app to facilitate that. to facilitate the delivery. And there we go. And basically what happens is a delivery agent, driver would receive a text message. The text message has a link. The link jumps into a BetterForms app. And from there, they can see the destinations and things like that. I was just looking for a valid token. I might have one actually still saved on my phone here. So let me just see if I can do that quick. So what happens is the driver clicks on that token. And when they do that, they they can find the drive, gives them driving instructions to their first destination. They can hit their first destination. It says what items that they need to pick out of the back of the van, and they can take a picture. And they take a picture of, say whoever the spouse getting the flowers at Valentine's Day or whatever it may be, and that picture gets uploaded to S3. If you're interested in learning about how that upload process works, we can have maybe a separate talk on that. Jason Wood, who may be here today, has developed a great custom function for accessing S3. It makes it really, really simple. We take advantage of that as well. And we push up the file up to S3. The file is set in a folder where it's we can derive the location of it, so that way they can present that information later on. They don't need to know any custom IDs or anything like that. And later on, they want to be able to maybe send a text message to a user. And when you send a text message to the user, you want to include a link to their image. The problem with that is, and I'm just going to pull something up here. The problem with that is when you open up the URL, you potentially have this massively long string because of the signature. And if you guys have ever seen an AWS string, it's incredibly long. So just a second here. I'm jumping in and out so I don't expose any data here. So I'm just jumping to something really quick here. There we go. Okay. So this back end is more or less headless. There's no application in here. And this is the signature that got uploaded from this one test destination. And this is in a web viewer because it's a link to the AWS bucket repository. And over here is just, I can ignore that. And there's just a picture of me just as a quick test picture. But this is a massively long URL. And it's pretty big because it has all kinds of information sort of embedded in it. And I can take that URL and paste it into here, and I can actually see it there, right? So it is a fully functioning URL. But the problem is the signature adds so much. So if you send that as a text message, it's not practical. You need to reduce that. So that's where a URL shortener comes in. The whole goal is you send somebody something with a really small signature, small URL with a couple, maybe 2 or 3 4 random characters on the end. That hits a server. The server looks that address up in the database, and then it returns the proper one. What makes this kind of tricky is when you return the image, you're not just trying to return the long URL. You're trying to re-forward using a 302 redirect. You're re-forwarding this user or this image to this new repository so that the browser handles it seamlessly. And that's the real trick. So now the goal is not to be able to send somebody this URL, but to send them something really short. And I'm going to show you what the short URL looks like, and then we'll look at how to build it really quick. So the short URL, I'm going to just grab this information here, which is the information for this destination and JSON editor online. And we'll paste this in here. All right, so this is basically an as-JSON object of the destination. A destination would be like somebody's house, right? It has things like contacts and items and things like this. This is all just test data, as you can see. And within that, it has a couple things. It has the original URL, which is the big, long, ugly one, but it also has this smaller one, which has a vanity domain. So you have this vanity domain. And Mark, you didn't get a 2-digit, you didn't buy a two-character top-level domain? It'd be about $1 million probably. So Right.
It would have saved another character. I'm actually looking for something a little bit shorter, but yeah.
You know what, though? I think it's pretty good. I think it's fine because it says what it is rather than if it said, YF, for example, or FW or something like that. So I think it's totally fine. So what we've done here is you see this URL. So let's have a look at this. We'll grab this one right here. And that one's the one for the signature. And that returned, you remember, so you saw what, I don't know if you caught that. I pasted in this small URL, hit enter, that returned virtually instantly the big URL, right? Put the small one in, I get the big one back. So this is what gets rendered. Now this URL works in WebViewer, it works in the browser directly. You can use it in HTML and as an image tag, whatever you want, because it's an actual location now is what's getting returned. So the way that works is really kind of neat. Right. And does anybody have any questions at all so far? If you do see, if somebody could just have a quick look at the chat there too. So I'll just show you how Michael built this. So this is taking advantage of it's taking advantage of the BetterForms REST API. We were going to use one of our automation tools, N8N or Node-RED. We have both sort of set up that we use. And we started building it out in that. And it was, then we realized it's like, why are we adding all this complexity? We could actually do this in like 1/10 of the code in actual FileMaker, right? Using BetterForms, all the tools we already have installed in for this application. So basically what happens is this URL, the short one, and let me grab a copy of the long one, or that's the signature short, and we'll go for the photo short. So this particular business use case, there's always one picture for the destination, and there's one picture for one image for the signature. So it's kind of predictable as to what they're going to be. And that's a kind of a use case specific thing. So that's why you only see one image. There's not a sub table of a whole bunch of pictures and things like that. It's not hyper normalized data. So here is the one for my image. There's a picture of me. I'm glad I changed my shirt today. And let's jump back to see how that works. First of all, if you look at the actual URL right here, you'll notice this is a domain that's been set up in BetterForms as a custom domain. Let me just show you really quick here. And you can see there it is set up as this custom domain here. So that's a production domain, right? That's the first part. Now, on the end of the domain, it says /API. Any calls that go in, you notice there's no hashtag symbol here. So this is not the web app. This is just a directly an endpoint right into BetterForms. So anything that ends with or starts with /API automatically gets branched to an API branch in the software. And then the stuff that's after that, there's a P indicating it's a picture. There's also an S version. So if I put the S in there, you can see I get something different. And P and S are the way we differentiate between the URL for the picture and for the signature. And then there's SFED in this case, some random characters. They're not quite random, but they sort of are in a way. So I'll show you how that works. So first of all, what happens is to generate the signature in the first place, what we need to do, and it's just crazy simple. Let's have a look. We have a hash. The hash is that SFED, that last little bit on the end, and you can see it somewhere right here. This is that hash. That's the 4 characters or so of entropy that we're using to differentiate this particular one from another one. We could use a serialized number, but then it'd be really easy to guess, right? 17, 18, 19. You remember the old photo sites back in the early web days. A lot of times people they wouldn't put unique IDs. They just put numbers on the end, and you can go in and change the number and see something that maybe you're not supposed to, right? So it's a really bad security flaw. Here, a little harder to guess. Okay, so the way we generate the hash is pretty simple. We need something to see the calculation to make sure that it's going to be unique to this hash is unique to this particular record. So we know this record has a unique ID. So what we do here is the real guts of it are happening right in here. What we're actually doing is we're using FileMaker's crypto base 64, which yields a a URL compatible characters. And we're taking the ID of this particular destination. There's some seed code here if you want to add a security. It doesn't really matter to that I'm exposing this because it's just a test one. And then I'm taking the 4 characters, the left of that cryptographic hash of the big UUID. I could use just a UUID, but that's not very short. So I'm going to take a crypto hash of that. The reason we're using crypto hash and not just a random number is it's less likely to have a collision. And we do one other thing here. It's exceptionally rare. It's like 1 in, I think I calculated it's base 64 to the exponent 4, which is a really big number. Chance of having a collision, but it's a theoretical possibility. So I take the chance and I double that by checking to see if it already exists. So I'm using to see if this hash exists. I'm just using get column, finding out if that hash is actually already being used, right? And if it is, I generate another one. That's all. And if it's not, I carry on. So that's what's happening here. So I just generate that hash. That's pretty simple. Then in our as JSON, we don't even have a field for this URL, right? Because there's no reason for it. I really try to stay away from generating more fields and more cruft in FileMaker as much as possible. And in our as JSON here, we can see right in these 2 lines here are where we're generating our short URL. We're hard coding the first half of the URL. So that's the http dc.yourflowers.vip/API SRP. And then we're just adding the hash on the end. So that's it. Right. The reason we broke the hash into a field is because we need to search on it later on. Right. And if it's at the end of some URL, we can't really search. Like you can put a wildcard in there and the hash and another wildcard or something like that. It's kind of gets a little bit ugly. So we're just going to generate the hash in that. And that's how we generate the hash. Right. And so that's it for the first part. Now, on the second part of the call or the second half of this, let me escape from here, discard. And let's look into the scripts here. Let me just close this up. Oops, one too many. All right. On the second half of the calls here, inside BetterForms, we have a script called on API callback. Now, Mark is already using this API callback in a couple different ways. This application is basically a cloud app that's not connected to his, his individual standalone FileMaker clients, right? They all have on-site FileMaker apps. They're sending up through a post, insert from URL, up to this application using this endpoint. And they're saying, here is my manifest of the delivery and the trip. And then that runs some routines in this app that sends the text message out to the driver. All of that information, including the driver's information, is sent up. So that way it's fully dynamic. The app itself doesn't care or doesn't know what store submitted the information because that's not its concern. So he's using that this endpoint in a few ways. And you can kind of see here how he's using it here. It's really easy to create these endpoints. Ignoring this section here for just a second. The endpoints are versioned, and you don't have to be versioned, but we figured we'd version it for longevity. So basically, BetterForms breaks out things like the version, the path, the content type, and stuff like that. And we're basically saying if the service, that's the endpoint of the URL, is trips, then we want to get and we want a post command, and we're checking for those and we're running scripts accordingly. There's another one for retrieving an individual destination. It's a deeper, bigger object as well. So there's a few endpoints that he's got over here. The one we really care about is this one up here. And we had to add an extra 4 lines or 3 lines of code only for the sake of saving one character. We wanted to save a slash, right? Because every character can potentially count in a tweet. So we wanted to save a slash there. So what we did is we don't say /s and then the hash. We just say /s and then with the hash and no extra slash. And we're basically running a script based on whether we get an S or a P. And let's just jump into that. And this is the script that's actually doing the business here. We're just instantiating a few variables like what the URL is, what the path, which is the path at the end of the at the end of the domain is, and we're grabbing the hash out of that. So I'm grabbing the rightmost 3 or 4 characters here out of that hash. So now I have the hash. Remember, we saved the hash in its own field, so now we can retrieve that. Michael's relatively new to FileMaker, so he kind of went old school with this. He did a go-to layout, entered the find mode, perform find, and you can see he's just probably pasting the hash in here. Yeah, there it is there. He's putting the hash in. And an easier way of doing this, you could save 3 lines, is just use a get column, and you could actually do it all in 1 line if you wanted to here. But it doesn't matter really here. So he's finding the record. In the event that there's an error, he's returning a URL not found. So that should actually yield, if I put XX, it should yield something. Yeah, URL not found. Right, so that's what's happening there. If he finds the URL, he's checking if it's a P or an S, a picture or an S thing, and then he's grabbing out of the destination, because he's already on that destination record now. He's grabbing that URL, that short URL, and he's putting it into a key called, or a variable called URL. And then he's doing a couple other things, set variable file name. I think that was some cruft in there by the looks of it. I'll probably get rid of that. All right. And then he's doing something here. And this is something that's kind of unique or special to this type of a hook. You can set the headers. In order to redirect somebody, you got to do some old school HTTP request stuff, and you have to actually set a 301 header. I guess that's a temporary redirect rather than a permanent one. 302 probably works the same. So that is setting a header key, and headers are just set in BetterForms with key value pairs. So he's basically setting that into an object called headers, and he's doing that. It's really, really simple. He's setting a key called location, which is the new location. That's how you do a redirect, and taking the URL that we just found. And he also set a status code, and that returns a status code. They're independent of the headers of 301. And then he's returning the script, and that's it. So it's literally 1, 2, word branching off on here. But if he didn't, it would be 3, maybe 4, 5 lines of code or so. And he's returning the long URL from the short URL. And that's basically how you build a URL shortener. I think it's really handy if you are using AWS, because you can make the link that people get, that short link. Now, there's a couple other bonuses that come along for the ride here. AWS has a signed signature. That signature, the signing can be either permanent or it can be temporary, I think up to a week. I think this one is set to be up to, I'm not sure even the length of time, but every time you hit that short URL, since it's going to an uncalculated field, which generates that signature using Jason Wood's custom function, we're actually refreshing the longevity of that link, right? So we don't have to worry about getting a fresh one each time, because even if it's cached in the browser, and you could set all the cache headers and all that stuff you want to get fancy, it's probably not going to be needed here. But that's something to keep in mind that it takes advantage of. And that's how a URL shortener works. Anybody have any questions about that?
Charles, explain to me the advantage of using the API to do this versus just standard BetterForms.
All right. Yeah. So BetterForms could yield you could put some kind of a link like that would look something like this. You could do something here, and it would say my pick, and then maybe something like ID equals, something, some kind of an ID. That would totally be right. In an on-form request, you grab that ID of the BF query and you find the picture and you return it. But it's a website, right? So that means all the website stuff has to load up at the same time, right? Okay. Yep. I want to take this picture and I want to throw it on my WordPress site, or I want to throw it anywhere, right? So that's the whole idea here. Is now, I don't know if I still have this on my clipboard. Oh, no, I just copied it. Figures.
Yeah, I get it. Yep.
Right. But yeah, I want to take this short URL, and Zoom's always in the way. There. And when I pop that in, this can be used anywhere.
Yep.
Right. It has the same characteristics for the most part as the AWS image. In fact, in some ways it's a little bit better because it doesn't have it doesn't expire, where the other one does. Does anybody who's currently using AWS for image store or document storage?
I use it, but we just store it and we just download it.
Super
I have a
easy.
need for something like this though.
Mhm.
This is pretty cool.
It's really easy, right? It's like 4 lines. We don't have an article, or I think Michael's writing up a quick blog type article, and we'll probably post that up. And it'll just be short on how to do all the moving parts. But there's not really very many. It's generate a hash, look up the hash when you get the thing in, and add the header in. So maybe 5 lines in total.
Yeah, no, this is cool because we do a lot with sending proofs via email. And I've been looking at using S3, and then this actually makes it a lot better just to throw it either in an email or even like, I know you're doing it for text, but like if we're sending text-based emails,
it can be
this
for
also
anything.
works. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be absolutely for anything. Here's how we upload the signature, right? It's not really, there's some more error trapping and things like that to make this a little bit more robust, but it's really, really quite simple too. We're using the BetterForms signature element that yields a base 64 result of the signature as a ping. So we're taking that base 64, we're building up a few things. Here's some parameters that are broken out. Lindsay Clark coded this particular bit up, part of our team. And basically what she's doing here is she's setting some things. She's getting out of the preferences. She's getting an access key, getting a secret access key, getting expire in seconds, getting region and the bucket, all this stuff. We're just grabbing out of the preferences so we can change that because we developed it with our S3 bucket, but of course we don't want to use that for production, so we can change that. If you're not already using, here's a very simple technique, just quick win, is the same get column function. And most people already have some type of a get prefs key, which probably does almost the same thing, but this one, you can just use it directly like this as well. It's almost as short as a get prefs key custom function. And all it does is it looks up the particular field that we're looking for in a preferences table. Then we're generating this path. That's how we're pushing the signature, the base 64, into the bucket. This is just an implementation of what Jason has in this custom function. We are getting a pre-signed URL. There's that custom function being used right here. So it's basically passing all of the options in. All right. And then from there, finally, we're adding some headers because the headers are used for what? To tell what the type of body that we're sending in. Since it's base 64, we want it to actually, AWS to take that base 64 and actually save it as an image. So we have to tell it that. So it's application octet stream that basically is base 64. And then finally, we use HTTP request as a subscript, but we're basically doing an insert from URL and we're handling the error. So really to send a file, in this case, a base 64 file from FileMaker to AWS, it's really and truly, I mean, this stuff could all be put in one line. It's really like 3 lines of code, right? It's having that ability to have that custom functions, really, it's a game changer because it's not this massive amounts of convoluted code. It's really 3 lines. Most of the stuff here is just for readability. All right. Anybody have any other questions on that?
Yeah, I'm really. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm really happy to see that what the possibilities are with the API because I have a business case at this point where I was thinking of building something in Node-RED because I need the typical output from the API, and I can see we can do that in the script. So that's awesome. I was wondering, how does the authentication work with the API? Can you handle it on your own?
To work. So here's what we did. We basically create a wildcard endpoint. So anything API star, anything on the end, we pass that into a script.
Okay.
Now it's up to you to do anything you want with it. By doing that, we keep it really, really flexible. So that means if you want to just have some kind of authentication, maybe you have some type of an API token in a client record. So if you have a whole bunch of clients hitting this API, you have a token, each one of them would have some type of API token, and that way they can refresh the token. And then that token would most likely be some kind of a UUID. That's good enough for security. And you would just, as the call comes in, if it's a GET request, for example, you would get that token and you can get it from the headers because the headers are exposed. They're brought into the brought in from the API, from the endpoint. You have access to the headers. You have access to the query parameters, and they're all in JSON objects for you. So there's not really much to do. You quickly check to see if it's a valid API key. If it is, you error, or if it isn't, you error. If it is, you return the data, and that's it. It's really, really easy.
Okay, great. And does it all work in all production, staging, testing,
Yes.
all environments? Okay.
Yeah, this actually, the API was actually one of the first things we built in BetterForms, believe it or not.
Okay.
So it goes right back to our oldest version.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
subsequently, the coding and the default coding in the script is a little bit older. It could be probably cleaned up a little bit because of that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. So I'm going to close that. Let's jump back over here. There's a lot of really cool use cases you can have for this, the API. If you need to do any type of syncing between two applications, you know, you keep between server to server, you can't run a script and call the other server. So you can't use FileMaker's native communication. So the API is really, really good for that. It's really handy for integration too, because it makes integration really, really easy. I wouldn't say you never need things like Node-RED or N8N, but you significantly reduce the need for that. I'll show you. This is what it would have looked like. This was the URL, our first URL shortener. This is NodeMation. It's very similar to Node-RED. And this actually, how do I guess I don't scroll. This was the URL shortener originally, minus these blocks. The default one that we used was using Airtable. Michael had converted it to use, actually it might be over here. Sorry. Michael had converted it to use FileMaker. So it's using FileMaker here. But again, it's way more moving parts, right? So we've actually significantly reduced the moving parts because there's all these blocks of code that are doing various chunks of the things. We already have that installed, and it's already proven itself in BetterForms. So we're just adding 2 lines of code. So we probably reduced it by a factor of maybe 20, I would say. Right? These applications have a awesome use, and if you don't use N8N, we can always talk about that. That's really easy. It's not super easy to set up, but it's pretty easy to set up. Node-RED, same thing. I think Jason even has an article or something on his blog on how to set it up. And correct me if I'm wrong. And they accomplish the same thing and allow you to connect up to all of these third-party tools, but don't always need it. All right. So if we don't have any more questions about that, I'm going to jump into our main thing I wanted to talk about today. And it's basically about lessons learned. And I first of all, just a disclaimer, I do not do most of these things. Okay. So I'm not preaching that this is what you should be doing. I'm saying these are my observations. And I think most of them are pretty sound for the most part. And I'll tell you with some of them, I can tell you why or how I made a note of this, because I can almost remember each single person that has done this and or hasn't done this and so on that I've made the note from. So again, I don't do all of these things. There's purely observations, and some of them may work for you, some of them may not, right? You have to sort of find your own groove that way. I think for the most part, they're pretty solid though. So I've kind of put them into categories, and I don't know how much time we'll have, and we'll go through some of them, maybe save some for later on. But the categories are relatively small. So let me just do this. And this is I'm using Notion here, which I kind of like for making notes, but it doesn't have a presentation mode or anything like that. So I've been trying to figure out how can I fake a presentation mode. So we'll sort of do something like that, I guess. So these first ones are just very, very simple things that I think everybody can do as a beginner. And this is really something that's silly. And the way we come to making this list is I spend a lot of time pair coding, as I mentioned. And I would say probably now, I don't know, maybe it's about between 10 and 15 hours a week at least. So over the past X amount of years, and it used to be more, I'm actually reducing it a bit. So literally hundreds and hundreds of hours, and with at least about 200 developers now. One of the biggest things for basics is retype it. I see so many people and they're typing something, and then they'll go back and they made a mistake and they're trying to go like this and they're trying to highlight just a couple letters. Just double click and retype the whole thing. Even if you make a mistake 2 times after that, so you've retyped it 3 times, you're still faster than using the mouse, taking your hands off the keyboard. And I'll explain a little later on why speed is really, really essential. These are just really basic things, right? Really basic things. Starting off with, code your loop exit cases first. I see a lot of people when they're building loops. This is more of a building pattern, not quite a design pattern, but a building pattern. Is they'll write a loop and they don't code the exit case. The first thing you should do when you're making any kind of a loop is make sure that the exit case is there and figure out and think about how it's going to work. Am I going to exit at the top of the loop? Am I going to exit at the bottom of the loop? Am I going to decrement something at the top prior and start at 0 and go to 1, or increment it? And how that structure is going to work so that you don't get tripped up on it later on. Because what happens is people start coding something, they start the loop, and then they don't think about it. They're so focused on the business function of the loop that they forget about the exit condition properly. And then they run into a snag where they have to go back and fix everything again. So if you start from the outside in, I find that that seems to have worked better for people. And that's kind of what I was saying, we're referring to here is build in steps from the outside in. So the first step of some kind of script, for example, it seems that people who start off with the input and the output result, even if it's hard-coded result in the script, that script will end up being a lot more sound than just starting to go linearly from the top to the bottom of the script. So you start from the beginning and the end, fake the data if you have to, put pseudocode in here. I'll talk about that in a bit, and then fill the data in. So it's starting from the outside in on that. Guys, if you have questions, comments, things that you can contribute to here, by all means, mention them. I'll tell you, and I can tell you almost the exact person. I'm not going to call them out or anything like that, but I can tell you the exact person that pretty much did all of these little points here. Speed and optimization of work. Use keyboard shortcuts, not right-click menus, right? And the reason for that is you're typing. It's a very tactile, kinesthetic type thing, and the right-click forces you to break context. And I still see a lot of people doing this. And they did that. And that 3 seconds, I don't know about you, but I got total goldfish memory. That 3 seconds is enough to make me drop one of the spinning plates in my head, right? And I see that all the time. And then it's like, okay, where was I again, right? So just right-click, Command-C, it's already there. It almost should be very instinctive. So that mental context of slowing you down, it's not about speed here. This is really about breaking focus. And the people who, I think it mentions it later on, but the people who are fast on the keyboard, there's 100% correlation from what I can see with how good they can code, how well they can develop. And it's only because everybody's got the same aptitude, I think, for the most part, but they don't have to break focus. Learn a new shortcut every week. If you could learn one keyboard shortcut, never mind a week, every month, if you just learn one new one a month, you think, what shortcut have I learned in the past month? Probably none. And I'll show you one that's a killer one right now. That was taught to me by somebody that's not in our dev group. But once a month, it'll give you a chance to you practice for the next month or the next week, and it'll give you such an advantage in your productivity that it's totally worth it. It's painful at first, like to learn anything is painful. But here's a real killer one here. This is, and some of you guys may already know this, so if you already know this, just let me know. But this is just a real simple thing because we're in this box all the time. Let me just find a random script here. All right, I'm in here and I want to do set field or set variable, sure, right? Or set field. You make a mistake, like here. So here when I do this, if I make a mistake, just start over again, still faster. So set variable. Let's do set variable, and I want to code the variable name. You probably know this. You don't actually have to put the variable name in there. Call it items. I don't know of a keyboard shortcut that jumps into this that's native, but we'll just say items is 5. If you press function return here, function return, my keyboard only went to the mouse once, and I've coded this, and I go on to my next line, right? That little bit, just a function return, is a huge one because you have to use a different part of the brain to move the mouse into the right spots. So that's a kind of a quick takeaway there. Function return, that's on Mac anyway. Learn type ahead. This is a real thing to learn type ahead. FileMaker introduced this, and I watched a video years ago. And remember, we never had type ahead. You had to go to a list, and you had to pick out the commands and stuff. And somebody was doing some video or something. I don't know who it was. And I thought, wow, look, they look like a real, like they know so much. They're so fast at it, right? And then I forced myself. I said, I should be fast too, like that. And I forced myself to do this. And I see people doing it all the time. This is what I mean by type ahead. Learn these commands, right? In BetterForms, the biggest things we're using is set variable and set field, right? Those are and JSON get element, JSON set element. Those are probably the top 5 commands. So if I have to do something, set variable, and I'll call it items. All right, there's where I broke context, broke focus, and then it's something like JSON get element, JGE. Learn that. Just that one is probably the most used command that you're going to ever use. With JSON get element, you already know these two options. You already know what they are. You don't need to have the memory. If it's like 6 parameters, 6 arguments there, I would just manually go here and I'd replace each one because I can't remember 6. But 2 of them, it's so easy to remember, right? Oops. And it's $BF underscore model, eyes are blurry, and then whatever the key is, right? Something like that. And learn that type ahead and get rid of this thing here, just this thing here. Close it, right? If you have it open, I find developers who are looking in here and scrolling through these steps, they already know what they're looking for. If you already know what you're looking for, why are you searching for it in here? Does that make sense? Right? You know what you want. I'm looking for a perform script. So why don't you just hit PS? And there it is, right? It's almost always the semantic or the first letters of each word. Go to related record. That was like the first one that everybody talked about, right? Go to related record. So if you already know what you're looking for, why do you have this window open? It's not like a menu. It's like, oh, I feel like a perform script today, right? You know exactly. It's very explicit. So that's a big one, right? As soon as you do that, you break context and you become less efficient. Close your tabs. This is another big one. Yeah.
Charles, you can also, obviously on Mac, create your own custom shortcuts for particular applications. So I've created like a shortcut to open external data sources, security, layouts, value lists. So again, it's really quick to just use that custom shortcut.
Yeah, those are really big. I think that was Neil. I do some of the ones like I do command. Let me see. The ones I have a couple. I don't have a lot of them because I don't use explicitly my laptop. I have separate desktops. And one of the ones I use is Command Shift Z. It's the same as undo, but I've remapped it to open up the data viewer. I found that super useful. I think the other one's Command Shift A for the debugger. I think that's already native. Command Shift S for the script workspace, and Command D, of course, that's already native to open up these. Learn those as well instead of going up to manage, because you can jump in and out. Most of the time you're jumping into something really quick because you need to make a quick augmentation to some third-party thing, like to what you're working on, like the variables and whatnot, and then you're jumping back. So those are good. Text expanders. Some people, I'll talk about those tools in a second, but text expander is the same thing. Some people are amazing at it. Close your tabs. I see a lot of people with a ton of open tabs, and it's almost, I don't know if we don't want to let go, but either the browser tends to crash after a while. You got 50 tabs. So I stopped counting at one person had 48 tabs open. And I didn't even know, but when you have that many tabs, you just get an icon, right? And then it doesn't, even the icons don't fit, right? So close your tabs. I find personally, now this is more of a me thing, is I like to have my tabs in order, and I have them from a left to a right in some kind of hierarchy. Usually the editor for BetterForms is on the leftmost side most of the time. Password managers. Who uses a password manager?
I do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And who doesn't use a password manager? Don't just keep yourself on mute if you don't use one. Don't tell anybody, right? And the reason for that is my worst case I've ever seen is somebody. We spent 45 minutes in BetterForms. You have to enter one set of credentials in 3 places. And I was working with 2 other developers. They wanted to sort of pair code together. So there's the 3 of us. And we spent 45 minutes, it's not an exaggeration, and for them to coordinate with each other, because they don't use a password manager, and to put the credentials in 3 places and not make mistakes, right? Believe it or not, setting credentials is probably the #1 support thing that we do, are the credentials correct in all 3 places? And one of the things you have to really watch out for is, of course, password managers themselves, which are great, and you should be using one, I think. They will clear off your clipboard sometimes. And people don't realize that they might have replaced it. So if you ever have that problem and you're not sure about the credentials, open up a notepad, paste your password there to make sure it's on your clipboard, then go back again and paste it to make sure the one that went into the box is correct. Incidentally, if you're ever on any page and you don't know the password, but you need to know the password for something, but it's got an input box and the browser knows the password, and it's put asterisks or whatever there. If you right click on the page, inspect the DOM, change the input type field from password to input or text, to text, then it'll just show the password. And that's kind of a hack you can do in a browser. Test accounts. We don't do this properly. And I've seen some developers, and they're really, really good at this. Some developers are really consistent. They always use the same whimsical type name or something like that to log into their test accounts. And I wish we had a really good naming convention. I don't know if anybody has one, but that's something that I think is really valuable. Does anybody have like a naming convention that they use for test accounts, but they can still kind of derive in their head what the password would be?
No, I just use the same one.
I can maybe also want to add another suggestion. What I use a lot for a few years now is that if you're using the Mac, I use FlyCut. I don't know if people know that. That's a clipboard manager. So it remembers 40 about last copy actions you made. And what I do is I type down the name of the app for a password, and then I paste a long string behind it. So I can do with Command-Shift-S, I can switch with the arrows on my keyboard. I can switch between every copy I made. So I can, especially with testing, it's really easy to, if you copy some code, then I have to log in again. Okay, Command-Shift-S, and I just switch a few steps back, paste in the password I used before, and then I can go on. And well, it's 2 answers on your question. The FlyCut is really an app that I love it. I'm using it for a few years now, and naming conventions for my passwords is app name and then a username if it's a test name, and then a long string behind it. So in FlyCut, I can always see, oh, this user, that's the password for that user, etc.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And does anybody use any password managers that they can share passwords amongst the team?
Yeah, we use LastPass.
LastPass?
Yeah.
I use LastPass. I also use clipboard history, which allows you to do as many as you want, and you can just hit a command key and you can see all the last things you pasted. It keeps images, everything. And
yeah, I use one called Paste, and you can even then create groups of previous things that you've copied and then save it to that group. So for example, I've got BetterForms clipboard where, you know, you can save the @click named action as a block of text, and then every time you need it, you just open it up, click on it, and there it is.
What was the
So
name
that's
of
what
that?
I've noticed. That's what I've noticed with developers who use tools. The tools, if you use the tool, you get really good benefit from it. I don't know for a fact if it's above if you didn't use the tool, but it sure looks like you do. What I mean by that is when I see people, especially clipboard managers, they're usually really, really quick. I don't personally use a clipboard manager. But the people I've paired with who use one are exceptionally fast at retrieving the stuff. They almost don't even see the screen. It flashes so quick, and then they grab the stuff. So that tells me that it's probably working.
Neil, did you say that was called Paste? The name of your clipboard manager? Was that you who said that?
Yes, yeah, it's called Paste. Donald, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Down and down or across and down, right? So here's one. This is something I see quite often. And this is one that used to trip me up, and I changed the way I did this. Let me just get rid of some of this stuff here. So you're doing something like this, and you got a whole bunch of these. And you have, we're going to some, you know, $, BF model. Can't see model and some key. First name first. Okay. And some people do the way they process this, and I think everybody's a little bit different. And I'm always, when I'm watching somebody work, I'm always like, I wonder what they're going to do. Are they going to go down and down or across and down? Some people just do this. Oops. They do this. And then they go from here and they change, you know, they change this, change that, change this, change this. Then they go down and down, and they go across and down. I used to go down and down, right? That's like more for a set field, because that's a good example of one set field, right? You have some field that you pick, that's this, and you have some value that you're putting in there. So, and when you duplicate this, they change this. But I've noticed the people who go across make less mistakes. Right, versus down and down. Now that's, you have to experiment, but you have to be really objective with yourself and say, do I make mistakes all the time or almost all the time? It always trips me up. Even though it resonates with you, it's still wrong, whatever you do, right? So I've noticed that. I used to go down and down. I hate going across because it feels like I'm going too slow, but I do make less mistakes. So that's something that I've learned from. I forget who that one was from.
Yeah, I can agree with that one. Because you focus one by one.
Yeah,
faster, but you do. Yeah, if you got a big long one, you got a lot. Yeah, you miss.
But some people are really good. In fairness, some people are really good at that. They can keep a big list in their head of where they're at, and they can see it right at a glance what's wrong. I can't do that, so I don't do that technique anymore. A lot of this stuff is about going fast. And the main reason for going fast is you can stay, for me anyway, I can stay focused. And I see people who can code really quick, they go really quick too. They're very, very, blah, 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 blah. Okay, let me try this. And it's hard to stay in pace with them. And I kind of put it towards this quote I found: often it's easier to run down a rocky path than to walk down it. You know, you're walking down something and it's going to go downhill a little bit. There's rocks, you're hanging onto trees, you're going really slow. And then at some point you say, screw it, I'm just going to go. And you just go for it. And somehow that ends up actually being safer than going slower. Right. So the idea, I think that what's happening there, I'm not a kinesiologist, but I think what's happening is basically you're a heck of a lot more focused because you can't think about other things. You're not thinking about fear. You're just going for it. And not breaking any context. I don't know if anybody uses Pomodoro technique at all. It's basically a technique where you set a timer for 25 minutes and you work on one task. And at the end of the timer, you stop. And I started doing this myself. I heard about it first from Susan Fenema, who was on our Friday Live about 3 or 4 times ago. And the idea here, and it's not really a pair coding thing, but this is a personal work thing. The idea is that you know the clock is running. So you tend to stay more focused. At least that's what's happening in my head when I do that. So I think that's, if you're interested now, you can just, it's called Pomodoro. You spell it wrong, you get a spaghetti sauce, I think. All right, design patterns. So these are ways that you code, build things and things like that. Certain design patterns tend to work better than others. This is a big one. Use intuitive standards. And this is for like naming. Even if they change or they're more intuitive, then it's okay for explicit naming. So what I'm talking about here is when you're having something like a naming convention, and that thing that you changed, we called it items. And then we realized items are really events, right? So it's okay to change, go back, change the name of it to be very explicit for yourself, right? As a design pattern, so that future you or the other developer on your team can see that and they can say, oh, this is items, but hold on, it's really events. That doesn't make any sense, right? So that throws them off. So by having those explicit names, that tends to keep people way more on track. I see a lot of times people, and I think I mentioned it here, plural, yeah, the next one. A lot of times people will call a bunch of things, a collection of things, a person, or they'll call it the singular form of whatever it is, item versus items. And then later on, they want to use item, but they have no place to go. So then they say item individual or some kind of thing like that. They compound their bad naming from initially, and they go on to further. And that creates more mental load. If you call something people and it's plural, and it is people, it implies that's what it is, right? So it's a very simple thing, I think. And I see a lot of people with these kinds of naming mechanisms. Here's another one here too. And I've stolen this one, not from our FileMaker community at all, but from other coding industry or coding environments. And it's to name things like a biological classification. So if you have a contact, you have a first name, a middle name, a last name, you have a cell phone, you have a work phone and a fax machine, right? You can call all this, and we're not talking about normalizing the contact, the locators and stuff. We're talking just if it was flat data. You can call the field first name, last name, middle name. But if you put it name first, name last, name middle, in any scenario, they always group together. So alphabetically up and down, they group together, they stay together. It's predictable what the name is going to be by the classification. And if somebody adds a new item, it's predictable what that new item is. If I said it's going to be a nickname, what would be the field? You'd say name Nick rather than nickname, right? So it's very predictable. That's a very easy one, but it's very predictable what the naming convention or the field names are. Another thing I see, and this is a little bit more applicable to anytime you're working with JSON, is to encapsulate your data. A lot of times people will take something like a person object, and it has first name, last name, middle name, all that stuff in it, address and things like that, and they don't wrap it in an object of what it is. And the object, we internally use the word entity. What is that thing? What is it? It's a person, it's a contact, it's an address, it's an invoice. That's the entity. But in this case, it would be a person. So we would wrap all of that up. And what that does is it allows you to grab just a person key and move it around throughout your code a lot easier. And by building up a deeper object, it may look more complex instead of having everything flat, but it's a lot more structured, and that gives you a lot more room to grow with your code. That's pretty much more so a BetterForms thing. Here's some stuff. How are we doing for time? We'll go maybe a little bit more. Here's some stuff on debugging. Proof, dry read your code. This is one that came from me here. I never used to do this that much. I would just like hit it and go for it. But when I started doing a lot of demos, I didn't want to end up looking like I don't know what I'm doing kind of thing. So I'd start to say, okay, let me proofread my code. And I always take a second to read it now. And just that, even if it's like a handful of code, there's a high probability that there could be a mistake in there. So by taking a second after you've committed it and to look at it, you actually save yourself a lot of time, because like right now at that point in time, this code is the most fresh in your head. When you jump to the other tab or the other page or the layout and you start running it, now you're thinking about, how do I get into this invoice special view where my code is going to run? And how am I I got to enter this dummy data, and then I do it, and then the code doesn't run. You go, oh, how come? And then you have to jump back. And again, you've lost the essence of what the code is doing. Here's a really, really big one. I even bolded this here. Don't guess. You're debugging something, don't guess. I see this all the time. People, oh, I think it's this, or I think it's that, I think it's this. Okay, well, how come you think it's that? And it's just a guess. Chances are the guesses are almost always wrong. And this is something I've noticed with a lot of people when they're trying to debug their scripts. They say, I can't see what the problem is, right? And most of the time, it's just me asking questions to debug it all the time. It's not about adding the breakpoints and things like that. And it's just about asking the questions because they're taking a guess and they actually have the answer. So educated guesses are okay, but only the first time, I found. After that, educate your assertions. Educate your assertions means you're basing your deductive logic when you're debugging something on what you think you know. And as we all know, the brain is the most fallible thing in terms of our memory. So continue to educate your assertions. You know, I always say, like, a lot of times I'm on a call and we're working on a really, really hard problem, say Eduardo and I keep going back, okay, what do we know? What do we know? And I make sure that I base my logic, my foundation layer of what we're deducing or deducting, that we know exactly what those things are 100%, right? The first name field is not getting populated. Is that a fact? Yes or no, right? And then off to the next thing. So educate your assertions. And then continue to go back into those again each time too, because stuff changes, right? We don't realize it, and this has happened, and I'm sure everybody knows the time you've gone through, you've tried something, and then took a guess, and let me try this over here. And you didn't quite clean that up, that little extra line that you added, you duplicated a line and changed some parameter in it. Then you went back over here and you tried something else. Now you've made all this mess, right? And even if you found the right answer, other mess is causing unintended consequences, reactions in your code, and it's buggering stuff up. So take the time to keep going back and reassess those base facts. Logical proofread code. This one here, logical proof the code before you change it. So does this make sense what I'm coding? Right? Ask yourself, okay, hold on, let me walk this through, talk it through out loud. If you're an oral type learner like myself, I have to sort of speak out loud with a lot of stuff. And that makes a huge difference in not building a bunch of garbage into your code. Take the time to work in baby steps by troubleshooting logic. I see this one as a huge one too. When you're troubleshooting something, I find a lot of developers will change something and expect like there's a whole big chain, an A plus a B plus a C plus a D and so on in code. And they'll change one at the beginning, but they won't assert that changed properly. And they'll just jump to the end and the end's not right. Okay, let me change, now I'm changing B. The end's still not right. Let me change A and B and C. Instead, start with changing A, make the change there, see what's going on, right? Is A changed properly? Yes. Okay. Now I know up to here, it's 100% solid as I expect it to be. Let me go on to the next phase, section B, and make that change. Go in those little steps. It in our head takes longer, but it's actually a shorter time altogether. You know, I think there's a study and with Windows machines that if you have a problem, I think it's something like and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's if the problem takes more than 30 minutes to solve, you're statistically better to reinstall the whole operating system. Have you guys ever heard of that before?
I haven't heard of it, but it sounds about right.
Yeah, right. It's some kind of number. If you can't solve the problem, and I don't know if it's the same today, but you know, last time I used Windows, I had my Windows machine was 2011, and you know, I was always messing around, swapping this DLL with that executable, and just trying to find the right set of drivers and stuff to get things to work. And you know, starting from scratch is often better.
I've heard if you go 20 minutes or longer on something you're not really familiar with, especially if you're trying to integrate with something else, it's best to just get the help right then and move on to something else during that time.
You know, it's funny you mention that. We have internally with our team, we have a 20-minute rule. If you're stuck on something for more than 20 minutes, you have to reach out for help. Right. And
it works that way.
You have to do it because next thing you know, you're stuck on a problem that could take somebody else like 2 minutes to solve. And sometimes they just solve it from a quick Slack message. Hey, did you check this? Did you check that? And you could spend 3 hours, and we see projects going sideways like that sometimes. So that's why we invoke that 20-minute rule. It's not always fun though, because sometimes solving that problem is kind of the joy of developing.
Sometimes just the fact that you can discuss it with somebody helps yourself to recognize what was wrong.
You know what? It's kind of funny you mention that. I do that all the time too. I'll hop on a call with Eduardo mostly because most of the code that I work on overlaps with the stuff that he does. And I'll speak out loud, and then like a third of through my explanation, I'll say, oh, okay, that's the problem. Because I'm going very methodically. I'm slowing myself down and figuring out where and articulating where the actual issues are. And this is what I've done, and so on. Build in layers, layer your work. This is a design pattern. And if you're interested in more about this, we have a video called API First Design. And it's the whole idea here is that code is done in sections. Like, let's talk about pure FileMaker. And most of you do some of this stuff already. You have a button on a layout that does something, make print invoice. So you might have the first layer of code is the button handler code, that stuff that handles the UI buttons or the UI interactions, things like on form load or the button clicks or field changed or something like that, script triggers, etc. Then the next layer of code is usually an API layer that doesn't necessarily interact or care about the user interface. That may be things like the print function. Maybe it just invokes the print dialog box and allows you to change some settings, right? It doesn't care what you're printing. It just does that stuff. Or some kind of window handler that centers a modal window. That's a totally abstracted piece of code. That type of stuff is the next layer. The lower layer, to the bottom more or less, is a service layer. Those are things that actually do something, duplicate an invoice, that type of stuff. So that's the kind of idea of layering your code. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to reuse a lot of things. Another thing I see a lot with debugging is people don't reduce to minimums. And another developer really made me realize this, how important this is to more or less keep commenting stuff out, keep removing stuff until you have the core problem isolated. Then you can start to add the things back in, and you can find out, well, when I add B plus C, that's when the problem occurs. So now you've isolated the problem. So that's kind of a big one, for a big intermediate level of troubleshooting. Do you guys document much? Document your stuff?
Been getting better at it the last year.
So that's a no.
Yeah.
Nope.
Right. So, there's this whole notion of self-documenting things. And I think you can sort of do that. You can say I as a counter, as an iterator, $I, and it's kind of cool. And it made sense when we had 1K of memory, because we had to save, I, K, J, for iterator variables. But for a new developer, if they've never seen I, they have no idea what that is. So it's okay to say item count, right? It's okay to say that, like in your code, the variables are cheap. Memory is cheap now. We don't have to, this is not like Viking 2 or something like that, where we got every byte counts, right? We have tons of memory. So you can make things more explicit that way. So that's can sort of help self-document. Script names can help self-document, right? They're not immutable. Script names, I think, for the most part, should be allowed to change to make sure they represent what they do.
I can vouch for, like just typing better, more descriptive stuff in your code and even script names paints such a bigger story than having to explain your small increments of naming conventions and other things.
I was on a call and I go, oh, wow, that's pretty code. Right. And this is a solo developer who's working on their own solution, but they had really nice code. It's like, wow, that looks really, really good. It's really readable. I can see exactly what you're doing there, like just at a glance. And I think that should be a goal for yourself and for, future you and anybody else who works on, if you want to eventually expand your team, somebody's working on this, they can understand what's going on. This is sort of for debugging, but it's more about learning as well. It's learn how to read GitHub modules or GitHub documentation more. Most people don't usually use GitHub because, for the most part, FileMaker code is FileMaker code, and we don't have it in Git. But as you do more BetterForms related stuff, you might be reading about more third-party modules. Hey, here's a new calendar picker that I want to use, and it's not doing something. So I was on a call just yesterday with a dev, and he was having some problems with a calendar module that he used. It's got a really nice UI, and it's a third-party module. So I said, let's have a look. And he actually did a really, really good job. I was really impressed because he went through, and he pretty much followed the same path that I did, or I followed the same path that he did, and went through, and it's like, oh, I see this is using a submodule, this Luxor module, right? It was a calendar picker. The calendar picker uses another module underneath it. And then the other module uses another thing underneath that. So it's 3 layers down, 3 different open source software, because they're all built on each other. And I drilled down to where the problem was. And he said, oh, actually, that link is bad. I tried that link. And it's like, wow, how did you find this link? Because it's totally unrelated software. And I did a really, really good job about learning how to do that. And you learn so much about not only how other people write their code by inspecting, but you also really, really develop the your creative abilities, because you can see, oh, I see how they're structuring stuff. Open source is very, very layered in terms of software. I've noticed on average, pretty code is generally cleaner code. And there's if you've ever watched Uncle Bob on clean code, he's got a series on YouTube, and he talks about this, and he says, this is your page of code here. And does your code sort of look like this? Your block of code? Or does it look like this? Like that. On average, this code is probably better code than this code. It's a pretty bold statement, but that's my observation. Apparently Uncle Bob's as well. So pretty code. Make your stuff pretty. It's readable. It's because you care about it, right? It's like a baby. All right. Here's another one. And this is just a little thing here. I just threw this in here. Add a perform script on server, escape, kill switch. And what that is if you're doing anything on server, there's a chance that you didn't go back and code your exit conditions properly. So you've just got a script that went awry. And then you say, oh, what's going on? It's not working. Let me click the button 2 more times. And now you got 3 scripts running, right? And they're all chewing up CPU, and eventually your server just explodes. So here's how you do that really, really quick. I'll show you quick. This is kind of something that everybody can use and you can take away right away. You have a, you have a script, and it's calling something on perform script on server. I just want to see if I have one in here. Yeah, okay. So I got this script here. It's doing something, and it's got some kind of loop. And when I run this utility hook, right now that loop is not going to exit. It's going to blow up my server. And if I click the button 2 or 3 more times, my server is going to die. Right? So it's exceptionally dangerous if I would hit save. So what we do is the very first thing, and this is mandatory now, is we add a perform script on here. And because I'm not talking about running something on server. This is assuming that the script is already running on server. So in here, we add this, we just call it PSO, perform script here, this emergency kill switch here, escape hatch, whatever you want to call it. We call it something different all the time. And what it is, it's an empty script, right? 100% empty script. So you can even see it here. There's nothing in it, nothing going on in there. So now, if I save this and I run this, I just created some CPU usage on my server because it's spinning around here. I can't go into this script and I can't do something like this and hit save again because that script is cached in FileMaker while it's running. But the subscripts that it calls are not cached. Excuse me. So what you do is in this script in here, and you just add this one line. When you're debugging, since there's no scripts in it, FileMaker doesn't even jump into it. So it just jumps right over it. So it's not even a pain it's not even in the way when you're debugging. And what this script does is it basically has just this command here, halt script. That's it. So you go into this script, you say, oh, shoot, I got a bad loop, right? I think I see constant CPU running. I don't even know where it is in the system. BetterForms, we have virtually every process runs asynchronously as perform script on server. So when you hit save in your form, we're returning the stuff, but we're taking that form, we're doing some stuff right away, and we're also logging that change. We're putting that into a repository to create a history of your saves. All of that stuff happens on server so that we can return the hook back, because it's fairly expensive. And every developer does this. They get something in there. So all you have to do is you go into this, you uncomment this, because this script is not cached, and you hit save. And you'll see after a few seconds, not instant, but after a few seconds, your CPU will drop back down and you just killed everything on server. And then when you're done, you go like this and you carry on and you figure out what went wrong. So that's what I mean by escape hatch. It's a more of a technique.
I got one question there before you move on. Do you ever add the script name in as a parameter when you call that?
That's a great, you know what, Dan, we were talking about that. I think it's Dan, right? We were talking about that, you and I think. And I want to create a custom function that can sit in there. And when we do perform script on, or sorry, when we add this kill switch in here, this one here, that we add a parameter in here of the custom function. It would be something like, you know, grab all the environmental variables, like the script name and stuff, because you have to do it from the calling script, right?
Yeah.
And all of that stuff, whatever stuff that we want to possibly track, because then as soon as we go over to here, and this is just my demo file, so it doesn't have much in there, but we have some other ones that do some logging in here. So then you can know what went awry. And you can also figure out what's running on the server, because you can add this into a log for every loop. And you can turn it on at any time, which is nice. So that's a great idea.
Yeah, sounds good. One other thought on that is you could have the calling script exit loop depending on the script parameter returned from that script, just so that you can, rather than halting the script, you have a chance to collect environmental data in the calling script.
So just to make sure I understand. So in this script here, this is my halt script here. I would have some kind of exit.
No, sorry, in the one above.
Okay.
The one that calls this is what I was referring to.
This one here. Okay. So this would have,
so right there.
I get a script parameter from here?
So right here, you could say exit loop if script result equals 1 or whatever.
Right. Okay. So then in this case, so I still need to exit. I have to exit here with a known option.
Script result.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That way, it gives you a chance to actually, in that case, you could say, okay, now if script result equals exit, now you have a chance to collect information about environmental data, so you can help debug this situation.
You can pass that environmental data in before you can call the script, right? You could just, like, if I had some custom function in here, it's called like get env, right? I'm about to write it like this. It'd be just a custom function that builds a JSON object of all the environmental variables. I can just call that here and then add my logger and turn my logger on here, I think, as well.
You could, I guess. One reason I wouldn't do that is because you're building that JSON every single iteration, even when you don't need it.
That's fair. That's fair. So what Dan's saying is at the top of this script, this could be expensive up here, depending on what I'm doing with it, especially if it's doing some kind of queries of getting other stuff.
Right.
That's
whereas if you do it in an if block right after that, then it's cheap because you only run that code when you need it.
Right. See, it's neat with code because there's substitutes, right? Like, I see that and go, oh, I got to code this extra stuff. And I'm pushing back in my head, right? I'm pushing back because I got to put an if block under here and everything like that. And of course, you can paste all of this stuff in so it's standard in your loop. But everybody has their own thing. And this is one of the things that I think it's one of the points is you can't be closed-minded to other people's ideas, because there's always these amazing ideas. And at first I just want to say, I don't do it that way. And that's our human nature. But it's actually a really good idea. So I tend to agree with you.
I like that too. Actually, I should have said that I haven't been doing that, and that was a good reminder that I need to add that one to my standards.
Yeah. So pseudocode. Here's a big one, and this is kind of an intermediate developer thing. It's just, and I don't say it's a beginner developer thing because you're not going to do it. But intermediate level is to write pseudocode. You're going to go into your script, and I see this very, very rarely what people want to do, but I do it all the time to explain what I want to our team. So we'll do something like get the ID item, all right, check if it's used, right, handle error. right? I hate that. There we go. Handle error and then return result. Right, we'll do something like that. Just to pseudocode this out, and then we'll start putting the blocks. Most people don't, on average, do this too much. And I think when you're not 100% clear of what you're trying to do, it's a great way of articulating. It's a little bit of a flow chart of what's happening. I don't know. Does anybody ever pseudocode anything out?
No,
Yeah, I do this
like,
same thing you do. I like that.
yeah, this is good to know. I do the other way. I just start and then you forget things.
Well, yeah, that's what happens, right? I think everything about developing or coding, and I hate the word coding anyway, but everything about it is all about cognitive load. Like we can all, the code is not so complex that we can't do it. It's just I can't juggle it all in the head at the same time. That's what it feels like anyway. So that's what pseudocoding, what I mean by that. I hear this a lot. Oh, I'm going to have to learn that. As if it's a big chore to learn whatever it is. Right? The things I used to hear the most were JSON. Oh, I'm going to have to learn JSON. Right? And now virtually everybody is, when we first started BetterForms, I would say maybe 1/3 or so of the users, maybe even less, were familiar with JSON. Now I would say it's very rare. I would say it's maybe 9 out of 10 developers that I onboard have used JSON. Maybe 1 out of 10 have not. So that's the ratio that's changed. But that mentality that, oh, I'm going to have to learn that as if it's a hard thing. And they hear this all the time. And I think that's I don't know if it's an imposter syndrome thing that's coming out or what. But I think it's the wrong attitude to have. It's okay. It's not like I will have to learn it in the future. It should be, I'm learning that right now. Right. And Jason's a really good example. Be enthusiastic when you ask questions. Leave your pride at the login screen. So this is more of about pair coding and working with somebody else. And just don't be shy, basically, about asking questions. Most people don't that much. They don't want to look like they don't know how to do something. But you know, the old saying no question is wrong or whatever is so true here. Balance mistakes. So I find, again, I've been talking a lot about speed and going quick, but that's what works for me personally. And I see also a correlation with other developers. They can go very, very quick with the keyboard. If you go too fast, you have to do a little bit of backtracking, not fast enough, and you too fast, not fast enough, and you don't go fast enough. And if you go too fast, you start to trip a little. It's good, I think, to trip a little bit in your code. I think you should go just fast enough that you start to make a little mistake. Oh, let me go back and click it and then carry on. I think that's the optimum rate of coding. I watch a lot of YouTubers in other platforms and languages, and sometimes I watch how they code. And I know they have a lot of this stuff prepared for the video, but there's a lot of them that just sort of off the cuff code as well. And you can tell, and they go sometimes quite often just the right speed, and they make mistakes. And so I think it's pretty okay to do that. How are we doing for time? We'll go a couple more. You guys want to go a few more? Or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I got to run.
Yep.
See you next time.
All right. Cheers. Thank you. Know your tools. Take the time to learn most of the stuff, you know, the Pareto's principle, where you got the 80% of the features, right? Or like probably 20% of the keyboard shortcuts and that kind of thing. So take the time to learn those tools. The people I've found who really know their tools are really, really proficient at it. Clipboard managers are the biggest one. Dedicate time to retool. We don't always do this, especially if you're consulting. You don't bother trying to learn new stuff and new tech. But everybody in this call pretty much has the same capability of learning new stuff. You say, oh, well, that guy's really good at this and this person's really good at that. Take the time to learn. Somebody dedicated, or sorry, somebody mentioned this to me once. Another developer, very, very prominent developer in our community, and he says, I spend about 25% to retooling, to learning new tech. And I thought to myself, it's like, yeah, I spend about that too. But now I make sure I try to do that, try to constantly improve my skills. So don't be stuck in a rut and doing the same thing. I do know, I can say that as you get older, like maybe say 40 plus, that you start to think, well, you know what, this is working for me up to now for half my adult life. I'm gonna continue in that same path. But you forget that you're not continuing in the same path. You were learning up to that point. So the same path is to continue to learn. This is the one I found that was pretty good with users, is be explicit when they're declaring things like variables. Some people get very creative, and at the beginning of the script, they'll have some custom function that breaks out all the variables that are in a JSON object that are passed in, like explode the object into variable names. But I've yet to see where that's really majorly beneficial, compared to the detriment of not realizing, or somebody else not seeing that code the variable get instantiated. So I've noticed that it tends to be better to explicitly state your let statements, like your variables, at the top, so you can see exactly what they are. Right? You can argue on that one, whatever you prefer, but that's just purely an observation.
Same with the find. Enter find mode and enter the.
So that's a funny one. Okay, so I've waffled on that one. So he's saying it's like, we go perform find. Like I showed you earlier, there was a variation of perform find in here. And inside this perform find was it just said like some object, some, ID item. And do we leave it in there like this? Or do we break it out and we go enter find mode, right? So it's enter. I never even use enter find mode. So enter find mode. So you can tell which one I do. And set variables and perform find. Do we do it that way? I think there's pros and cons to both, to be honest with you. I think if you just look at one thing, it's okay. I know when we're doing some kind of advanced query search, like I think this one does it. Let me just see if it. This is a project that Christina is working on, and it is it's replacing an old legacy FileMaker app. And in this case, this is just in being developed here. But if I say Mo, I'm just wondering, because these are real information that comes. No, I think it's old. Let's see. Let's treat Charles. No, let me try my information, because I don't care if I share that. All right. So this is data, and this is doing a find on FileMaker of this field and this field and this field, and start range, end range, and all this kind of stuff. And it's returning this data here. So that one is broken out because there's like 7 items and you have to be able to see them all. So it's a hard one, I think. Project planning, lo-fi mock up your ideas. Virtually never see this. Not until like sometimes a second training call. What I often do is I'll jump on whimsical and I really understand what they're trying to build, because they're trying to build an application with the limitations of what they know in FileMaker, and they're trying to transpose that into BetterForms, which is not really how you should do it. You should be basically taking what's out in the rest of the web and trying to bring that backwards. So lo-fi mock up your ideas. That way you don't limit yourself to what your technical constraints are, but you limit yourself to what your design creativity is. All right. This is a real important one, I think. If you're taking your product far, is work with a UX designer, and they are different than a UI person. Pearson's our UX department, but we also work with Fred Illies of UX Edge, and we also work with another designer, Anna, for some projects. So we work with 3 designers, but 80% of the time it's it's in-house. And it gives you such clarity to when you're building something that you build it so much quicker. All right. So Christina's building this app. She doesn't really know what the app does. Right. But she can build the whole thing. She's coded out the whole thing. I don't know if I can get something in here. Yeah, so she's coding out the whole thing. Oops, I'm just going to close that. We can do that. And doesn't need to understand the big picture. And she can really focus on getting the interactions, because she knows what this is going to do here, right? But she doesn't really know the big picture, but the design helps so much further. Don't start apps by adding everything in. This is a big mistake I see a lot of people building. Is it's fun to add UI, right? Because it makes the app feel finished. So they'll start with a template or something like that, and they'll add okay, this option, that option, all of those options. So what you've done is you've started with this thing that worked, and then you've opened it up to all these things that don't work, right? And then every time you use it, you remind yourself that it's broken instead of that it's working, right? So narrow that focus down so that you just work on that one feature, get it out the door, deliver it. Deliver it doesn't mean to the client, it means to yourself, right? So you can use it and then work on another feature rather than just, okay, I'm gonna put this here and there's a placeholder for that and this, because half the time those placeholders never get developed, right? So that's what I'm referring to there. And the last thing here, maybe what we'll do is we can go a bit more, is stay with your scope of your app really, really narrow. I see a lot of people, again, building apps, and they just keep adding feature upon feature. And the tools that you use best, the ones that are most useful to you, do one simple thing, like Calendly, right? We switched to Calendly from some other calendar program that we had with our CRM. It does one thing, and it does it fairly well, right? It's actually, I would say, it's pretty decent software. So instead of, if you think of, you add a module into your software as some kind of building block here, and that, let's say, has 90% bug-free, right? Software is never bug-free, so let's give it a 90%. That's like an A+ rating. Then you add a second module, right? That module becomes my 90% bug-free eventually. But at first, to get to this 90%, it was really originally only at 60%, right? Because it's kind of buggy, it's kind of clunky. Then you add another feature, and now you're focusing on the 60% on this feature. And then you go and add another feature. So now you have the total number of bugs in your surface is really, really big. But if you push back on the features as much as possible, and you can't always do this, I understand this, you can't always do this with clients, but if you push back on these features and focus on this one, get it to this high level of quality, and then you start the second one and get that one out the door, that tends to work better. And again, this is not something that we practice, right? This is something that I observed that works well for some developers. This is a direction that we're trying to, as a goal, as a team, trying to move towards. And I'm going to close that. And we got time. We'll go maybe another 10 minutes. Is that okay? Or what? What do you guys think? It's up to you.
I'm good with whatever.
Hopefully there's something.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. Hopefully there's something you can take away. Neil, you had pretty code, if I remember correct. I think it was you. You had really, really well. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I even looked at it and said, wow, that's really nice. Right. I think it was yours. If not, you just take it.
I'll take that. Thanks.
Yeah. Tooling. I've noticed it doesn't really matter what tools you use. If you're using the tools, then it works for you. I haven't seen a correlation like, oh, the people who use clipboard managers and better password managers and all kinds of gizmos and stuff like that are better. I haven't noticed any correlation myself with that as compared to the people who just, old school and open up text editor on the side and cut and paste the stuff and use that for a clipboard manager. They're just as efficient, right? That's my observation. But that doesn't mean if they switch to a tool that they would be better, right? They're using what they figure is good enough, and that seems to be good enough from what it seems like. This is one I've noticed. Most woodworking tools are made of steel. Most jigs for woodworking are made out of wood. So the woodworking tools, the actual things that you're doing are made of steel. They're made out of a higher level of technology. In other words, don't build a JSON editor in FileMaker, right? Don't build a password manager in FileMaker unless it has absolutely some major benefit over a password manager, because the steel is 1Password, is LastPass, right? The wood is FileMaker if you're building it in FileMaker, right? FileMaker is the steel to Excel, if that makes sense. Clipboard manager, I already mentioned that. If you use them, they're good. Here's some stuff on learning new skills. Pair code. If you can try to pair code with people, meet it with other people, even make a deal with them. Say, hey, listen, let's go hour for hour. We'll work on your app. We'll work on my app. You'd be amazed at how much how productive you are, because there's zero distractions. If you're like me, you get distracted by everything. There's Slack messages coming in. I usually jump as soon as there's about 15 or 20 Slacks that I have to adjust, and I try to knock them all off and jump back, and I lose focus. But when I'm pair coding with somebody, I do it way less often. So it's there's some serious synergy there. Learn when to do stuff really, really fast and jump around, and learn when to go slow. I see some developers are really slow and methodical, and that's really good. And then they can speed up at other things. Take the time to slow down if you're running into problems, and to take a breath kind of thing without getting too meta. It does actually make somewhat of a difference. Retool, dedicate a percentage of your time. I personally used to dedicate about 25 to 30% of my time when I was developing BetterForms. It was 90% of my time, right? Because there's a lot of stuff I was learning myself. Because I came from PHP background, move over to Node.js, so that's a whole new environment. And it's a big difference between building a quick to-do app to building a big scalable app. So take the time to retool. I'm only down to about 10, 20, 15% now, but I'm trying to bring that back up. If you're not embarrassed by your code, and you've probably heard this before, anything, and I think they used to say, like, if something you wrote 6 months ago, if you're not embarrassed by that, you're not progressing enough. I think it's more like maybe a year to 2 years. Like, I still find some code that I've written 5 years ago, and it's like, well, that's pretty good. I'm kind of really happy with it. But there's other stuff. It's like, yeah, that was a long time ago, right? Our API script, right? I wrote that, and I need to go back and clean it up, and we never have for the API endpoint. Don't judge your skills. I see a lot of developers sort of knocking themselves, well, I don't know that, and they know all of this stuff and things like that. And I work with them, and it's like, no, you're actually a really good developer. You're really, really good, because you're solving the problems, right? You're out there, you're actively engaging yourself into solving the problems instead of running away from it. A lot of people will run away from the challenge, right? Some people will really say, okay, I'm really sink my teeth into this problem and solve it. And other people, it's like, screw it, I'm not going to do it anymore. Or they changed their way, or I tried to do that and I couldn't figure it out, so I went on to this, right? So there's a kind of a balance there. I don't know. I guess you have to find the optimal point. I mentioned source code already. These people who contribute to open source, because the nature of open source software is constant improvement, when people contribute, there's usually, with most libraries, there's relatively strict requirements to be able to contribute to that library. So they have to have written tests for it. They have to make sure their code is not them specific and can be used globally, things like that. It has to be efficient, right? So I don't want to say smarter, but more knowledgeable people will look at the code and say, yeah, it's not really efficient the way you did that. It's really kludgy, right? It's kind of rookie. Go back, change it a bit, do it this way, and then they'll accept that request to change it. So there's a really huge benefit, especially in JavaScript, because that is the #1 amount of open source code there is now. I also found, this is something here a little different. I noticed that some people, when the new feature comes out in FileMaker, whatever the new feature is, we got, I don't know, master detail or something like that, they'll jump in to use it. And I used to be like that. I used to be one of the ones that trying to find new techniques and hacks and cool ways of doing stuff. And I love that, right? The cooler, more edge case it was. And I sort of pat myself on the back with that. But now what I've found is I pay attention to what's new, but I don't implement it unless I actually need it. And I don't worry about how it works. I just worry about I just concern myself with what it does. Here's a new feature, and it allows us to use the data API in a script. Okay, got it, right? I don't really need to experiment. I know that now I can use the data API in a script, execute data API. So I'll hang on to that in my head, and that's it. So it's way less cognitive load or knowledge load to get the same result. And then when I have to actually use that technology, then you can go back and learn it. Learn just what you need. So it's kind of like a just in time for knowledge. I think we'll go just a couple more minutes and then we'll finish up. Here's a couple other things here. This is more on what I've noticed about meetings. I'm the worst for this. Speak slower when you're explaining something. So if you're explaining something, you're pair coding to somebody else and they're trying to solve the problem, just slow it down a little bit, because you've looked at this problem 1,000,000 times. And you scratch your head on it for the last 2 hours, and then you finally reached out for some help. And then you go, oh, I did this and this and this and this and this. And it's like, whoa, slow down. Can you show me this? Can you show me that? So you have to almost interrupt the person and say, be very explicit in what you're asking for. Can you show me the second tab and learn that communication language? This is more for pair coding. If you're working with somebody and you're trying to convey an idea, this is kind of a sales thing, but I find it works really well when you're pair coding with somebody and you're both working on a project and you want a way of doing something. And I learned this from a sales guy. His name is Brian Tracy. And it's called Feel, Felt, Found. And it's just it's a really simple little thing. And if somebody said to me, I want to use selector connector, or I want to use separation model, and I say, no, I want to use selector connector. So John said to me, I want to use selector connector model design, or sorry, I want to use separation. And I said, my goal is to use a different technology. It's like, I understand how you feel. And we have, I felt like that too before I started using this new way of doing things. But then what I found was after I started doing these things, I found this other result. And it's a nice, easy way of conveying your thoughts across. Cam on, cam off. I remember once when I first made this list, 3 years ago in Berlin, I presented this, or actually I think it was about pause on air, talked about this, and I got a bunch of pushback from people in the audience. They said, oh no, I never go cam on. Oh, I got to get my hair done and all this kind of stuff. And they literally said that. And obviously our culture's changed now. It's almost rude to have your cam off when you're on a one-to-one call, right? So I think that's kind of interesting. Here's one I learned from working with a developer. He was the manager at this dev house, pretty big dev house. And no matter how the call was, when he ended the call, well, there's two things. There's from three people, actually. It's from one of the developers in Toronto and then one in the States. The one developer, Dave, he would end the call and he would always smile, like just a nice, pleasant smile. And it left you walked away feeling good from the meeting. It wasn't like, yeah, okay, talk to you later, click, boom, closed, right? And it's a very, very subtle thing if you're communicating with clients. And the other developer, he stops his screen share. And he might be on the call. This is Doug. And he always says almost the same thing. He goes, well, thank you for this meeting. And it's like, just suddenly my whole attitude has changed, right? Chris actually is in this call as well. He's kind of a little bit of a contributor to this. Very positive all the time in these calls. And it makes me on the other side of that equation want to work harder to achieve the goal. So I think that's it's just a subtle little thing that I've noticed from all of these Zooms. 3 minutes, that's it. Last one. This looks like the same thing. Oh, it was. Okay. Devs tend to stick to the design patterns, always not wanting to learn more, accepting Zoom's in the way, accepting what they do is not optimal, right? Be real, like try these different approach patterns. Dan, I don't know if you're still on the call, but Dan introduced me to,
still here.
Yeah, Dan introduced me to an error trapping loop, right? And I never used it. I knew about it because it was one of the things I was cognizant of it, but I never used it much, right? I was doing some work with Dan. And that's mandatory in everything we do now, right? Because it's like I tried that design pattern. I had to be open-minded to it. I was forced to do it, use it. And then it's like, it's no brainer. This is how I'm coding and going forward, right? Refactor, if it's ugly or it hurts, refactor. Refactor is to change your code from one big, huge, long script into a bunch of smaller ones for the most part, right? If it feels like a refactor, if it feels like a bad relationship, right? I have noticed if you want to be a good developer, I don't know if there's reciprocity in this, but if you want to be a good developer, you got to be fast with the keyboard because all the good ones that I've seen are all really quick with their keyboards. They're quick with their shortcuts and stuff like that. And they're just boom, 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 right? Even if they're novice and they're good, they're still the same thing. So I don't know if the reverse holds true, but I do know that developers who are sort of like this with the camera, and their hands are on their face and their one hand's on the mouse and they're just moving so slow, those ones tend to not be as proficient at writing cleaner code. Just an observation. Refactoring is like a divorce, really ugly at first, and you don't want to do it. But then after a while, you wonder, what the heck was I thinking? All right. Take the time to change the code because it's so true. 100% true. Right. And you think, you're so much happier after you refactored something. Right. And I've mentioned the GitHub issues. There's some duplicate here. if you're learning, if you're searching the GitHub issues, learn how to search the closed issues, because that's where, or all issues, even if they're open or closed, but that's where the real good stuff is, right? Not just in the code, but it's in how people have referenced other things, because there's so much communal contribution in there. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. I know I got a couple other things, but that's okay. If you're looking for some resources, Uncle Bob Clean Code on YouTube. And you can find Uncle Bob. Here he is, Clean Code Lessons 1. This is about 6-hour course. Put it on. It's I think it's awesome. I think it's really awesome. It covers a lot of similar stuff and way more depth of other things. And if you don't have the opportunity, pair code. Even if it's uncomfortable, pair code with somebody, because then you're forced to kind of go into their world, and our Venns of knowledge, it's definitely going to expand yours. So I'm going to leave it at that. And if I don't know if you guys have any questions, comments, contributions.
It was really good. Thanks. Good tips.
Well, like I said, I'm not preaching this is what you should do. These are purely observations, right? And you take out of that what you want. If you take one thing, like, okay, now I know a function enter closes a window, then you're further ahead.
Yeah, no, this is cool, man. Thanks for kind of aggregating all the stuff you've learned from a bunch of people into just a nice little 1 hour presentation. 2 hour.
Oh, here, I'm going to do this one here too. Devs, just stop. Things you need to stop doing. Stop guessing, because they're almost always wrong. Don't make homemade password managers. I think I kind of mentioned that. High-nosed noob right side menus, that's those things in FileMaker, just close them, start typing ahead. It's going to be painful for the first hour, and then that's it. Get rid of all these Zs and underscores and all these crazy ass naming conventions. And if you need to sort your stuff, your names aren't name semantic enough, right? If you need to sort your field names, the names are not predictable. So you're doing it in a different manner, right? And major fires. This is a big one because we have major fires, right? We run a mission critical app, and it's stressful as heck if something goes wrong, right? If something goes wrong, it takes us about 4 minutes to flip over our data centers if we have an issue. And in that 4 minutes, I'll get 50 messages over the next half an hour, I'd say, from that 4 minutes. And some of them, the issue's already been rectified, but I will still get the messages in. And I tend to be the frontline person. I field a lot of that stuff. And it's really, really key. And I know it gets stressful for all the other developers too, because you maybe fielding something from your client if your FileMaker server goes offline or something. But I found staying calm, we all know the importance of getting things fixed. So it's just about almost blocking out the negativity and not replying to things, and just get the issue fixed. And it tends to be faster, I've found, rather than trying to put out little fires. It's like, okay, let me calm down and let me try to address the big picture. That was that's kind of one from my exposure to things. So yeah.
Thanks, Charles. That was really good. We've talked about clipboard managers a bit. Does anyone use any tools as like for saving chunks of FileMaker code to reuse and not having to then go and find where it is in a script somewhere and copy and paste it in?
That would be really good for things like error loops and stuff that you commonly do as well.
I actually use Typinator. It's not a clipboard manager. It's just replacing what you type in. So like JSON set element, and then all of a sudden I have the whole thing in front of me to easily modify.
So it's like a text expander type app?
Yes, exactly.
Right. What about?
There's a couple that I've used. There's one called One More Clip, which puts an icon in your in your toolbar at the top of your screen, and then you can copy a bunch of FileMaker code, like you say, like your error loop or a.
So it actually copies the XML properly.
Exactly. Yeah, and then you can just you open that up, click on the one you want, and then click paste, and it pastes it into a script. There's also there's a FileMaker file from Camp Software called FM Clips. I think that's quite old, but that does the same sort of thing. You can basically create a new record in a FileMaker table and then paste in the XML, and then use that as sort of like a library of code, I suppose.
Yeah, the pasting of the XML stuff I think is really valuable. BetterForms, we sort of do something like that when you install the hooks, right? It modifies the XML and then it pastes it onto your clipboard or puts it into your clipboard. Yeah. And we'd like to be able to do that from the browser, but that's a security breach for browsers. Browsers can't access the clipboard directly like that, at least with certain types of content. So, and it's weird because you can put text on the clipboard because when you copy a snippet, you're putting it on there. We have an action for that. So that's one of the things that we're looking at working around. So that way we don't, you get the source data, always the latest version of the hook code, if you will, from the editor versus from FileMaker. That's actually something you could build quite well in FileMaker too, though. That's almost a useful thing. Like a useful tool that you could build, because FileMaker can do that very well if you ever wanted to build a code repo. You know who started doing that is Louis DePera. He was working on, what was it called?
It's called Dropship.
Dropship, yeah.
The link. I forget who took it over, but somebody's taken it over.
It's probably Eden.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I've liked to merge or store clipboard XML in my text expander. And so
can you do that? Can you do that with text expander?
Well, I have. So I pasted a link to my GitHub repo. It's got the PowerShell tools and also a link to the Mac equivalent of that. And basically you use, if you can, in your clip expander, depending on which one you use, you can, I use phrase expander on Windows, but you can, store the XML, then call some command line tool to convert it and paste. So for example, I can be in a FileMaker script and start typing like SS for script step, exit loop, and or single pass loop, and it'll give me my air trapping loop. And so I can kind of scaffold out a template script, just, hands on the keyboard, not having to leave it or anything. I don't have to go somewhere else and copy paste. It's just right there.
Yeah, that's what I refer to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Doing that on the Mac with ATEX, which is just $5.
Yeah.
And there's, again, I forget who, but there's Apple scripts available to do the conversion between XML and the FileMaker pastable objects.
Do you have that running, Jason? Like with ATEX that you could do FileMaker pastable stuff?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, because ATEX can run an Apple script before or after an action. So that's how it works.
Right.
I think those Apple scripts are in, I have the link to them. I think it was Dan Chalkley, or it's the ones I know of.
Yep, that's right.
I posted them. So if you go to my repo, there's links at the bottom there.
If you're looking for Jason pointed me to ATEX. It's a sole developer guy somewhere. And it's like, he charges $5, not $5 a month, like Text Expander. And it does the same thing as Text Expander. Almost identical. And it's a one-time payment, so.
Just posted that link.
I actually lost my license key and the support's not so good. It says contact us for a license to get the license key back. And I just bought it again because it's like so cheap. It's like, I can't wait. So, and you can share it amongst your different devices. So if I create a keystroke and I use it for things like divs. So I type in div, or if I type div, it creates me a nested couple divs and stuff like that, email links and Zoom links and calendars and stuff. Just looking through these. Function return on Mac laptop. Enter key is alternative if you have a desktop keyboard. Well, can you use the, somebody said that. Dan, you can use the enter key on the right-hand side. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so like on the number keypad, you got a full keyboard. It's funny because this just came up in a separate group just yesterday for me. Hadn't heard of that one before.
I wish you could just turn off that Maverick window that FileMaker has, that first text window. Like, I've seen people code in there, and it's like, if you can do that, that's you're a Maverick for sure, right? It's before you get into the to the real window.
Yeah, Charles, on Windows, I don't know, you can just tab to that specify button too.
I was thinking that too.
Yeah, I think you can a Mac. I'm sure there's an accessibility. You can do it. I find when I do that sometimes if I don't have it learned,
Yeah.
I go past it and then you go cycle all the way around again. But it's whatever works well. I think that's the biggest thing is you have to find the stuff that works for you, but you have to be open to change. If you find that something's painful all the time, like I used to make a lot more mistakes. Like this, the down and down thing. I used to make a mistake almost every single time, even 4 items, because I couldn't focus on it for some reason. And I just changed the workflow and I hated changing it, but now it's natural now. That's how I do it. Guys, what would you like to see as far as content? We have, this group was about 20 people, which I think is pretty good for a private FileMaker meetup group. I guess you could say corporate sponsored. But we don't try to make it too much like that. What would you like to see as far as content and things like that? We do have a list of suggestions that we keep. I know when we've had guests.
One would be the a return session on new features whenever FileMaker is now FileMaker not necessarily have a full version release, but new features coming up time after time. Would be nice to, on a regular or more or less regular basis, to overview what's new.
Right, and maybe some techniques on how to use those things.
Yes.
Right. So we could potentially have one on say, here's how you add OAuth to your, and we'll actually walk through and add OAuth. Okay. I think that we can have that. We're thinking of some kind of a technical, like today I talked about a URL shortener. And maybe doing that each time. Do you guys like it when we have some of the other people from the team on? Or indifferent? It doesn't matter.
Whoever knows the stuff.
Fair enough. We've had a number of guests on, and the probably the most popular ones are Mark here, who's in the call, and Jesse, and who's not in the call today. And those have been really popular, I think, as well. And I've been trying not to make things too vertical centric but it is a big part of our audience. Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about. I'm just going to pause our video here I'm going to stop our video. And thank you guys for coming out today.